Imagine a world where the swastika waves over every capital city, where dissent is silenced before it can breathe, and where the truth is whatever the state commands it to be. In this reality, freedom is a dangerous memory, whispered in secret and punished without mercy. The war that once decided the fate of humanity ended very differently, not in the liberation of Europe, but in its complete subjugation. This is not our history, but it could have been. The year is 1945, and the Axis powers stand victorious. London has fallen, Moscow lies in ruins, and the United States is forced into an uneasy armistice. The Nazi dream of a 1,000-year Reich is no longer propaganda. It is the law of the world. Across the globe, maps have been redrawn, cultures erased, and nations reduced to tools of the regime. The nightmare of tyranny has become humanity's only reality. But victory did not come overnight. It was forged in battles won through ruthless efficiency, calculated deception, and a refusal to repeat the mistakes of our history. This world's timeline is carved from a series of brutal turning points that reshaped everything we know. To understand the present, we must first walk through the alternate past that birthed it. In the hours ahead, we will journey through a dark and chilling history. From the moment the Nazis secured their dominance to the modern-day legacy of their rule. This is a story of conquest, oppression, rebellion, and survival. This is the world that might have been had the Nazis won the Second World War. The fall of Britain. The year 1941 unfolds differently. Instead of turning east toward the Soviet Union, Hitler pours the full might of the Luftwaffe and Kriegsmarine into Britain. The Blitz never ends. It intensifies, burning through London's defenses until the city is crippled. German U-boats cut off supply lines, starving the island nation into desperation. Within months, Britain faces the unthinkable. By early 1942, Prime Minister Churchill is assassinated in a German bombing raid. A collaborationist government rises in his place, signing a treaty that places Britain under Nazi administration. British soldiers are forced to swear loyalty to the Reich, and dissenters vanish into camps. The royal family is exiled to Canada, their return forbidden by the occupiers. Nazi flags drape over Buckingham Palace as Berlin celebrates its greatest propaganda victory. British schools begin teaching German as a mandatory language, and centuries of parliamentary tradition are dismantled overnight. Those who once fought to defend freedom now find themselves living under an iron fist. The heart of the Allied resistance has been crushed. The fall of Britain sends shockwaves across the world. In America, isolationists gain political strength, arguing that if Britain cannot stand, neither can they. Japan seizes the moment to expand across the Pacific, while Germany turns its attention toward the Middle East, eyeing the oil fields it needs to sustain its empire. The world is shifting, and fast. The collapse of the Soviet Union. In this altered timeline, Operation Barbarossa is delayed until Germany has secured its Western Front. The extra time allows the Wehrmacht to amass overwhelming resources for the invasion. When the assault finally begins in 1943, it is swift, coordinated, and devastating. Soviet defenses crumble under the combined weight of German armor and air power. Moscow falls within months. Stalin is captured and executed publicly in Red Square, a chilling warning to anyone who dares to resist the Reich. Soviet generals, fearing annihilation, surrender entire armies without a fight. The Soviet Union fractures into German-controlled territories, with puppet states ruling in the Reich's name. The vast resources of the East are now at Hitler's disposal. Ukrainian wheat, Russian oil, and Siberian minerals flow into the Nazi war machine. Millions are enslaved to work in brutal conditions, feeding the insatiable demands of the Reich's industry and military expansion. Resistance movements exist, but they are scattered and easily crushed. The collapse of the Soviet Union cements Germany's dominance over Eurasia. Without the Eastern Front to drain its strength, the Nazi war machine becomes unstoppable. Hitler's vision of Lebensraum, a continent reshaped for the so-called Aryan race, is no longer a dream. It is a reality, enforced with blood and steel. The American surrender. By 1944, the United States finds itself fighting a two-front war it cannot win. Japan controls the Pacific, cutting off American supply lines and threatening the West Coast. Germany, now unopposed in Europe, launches devastating long-range bombing raids on the East Coast. Cities like New York and Washington are reduced to rubble. President Roosevelt faces mounting pressure from both the public and Congress. American morale is shattered by the loss of Hawaii, Alaska, and several Pacific territories to Japan. The Atlantic convoys are decimated by German U-boats, leaving the U.S. unable to sustain its military presence overseas. In a desperate bid to save what remains, Roosevelt signs the Treaty of Richmond in late 1945. The agreement forces America to withdraw from the war, ceding Pacific territories to Japan and recognizing German dominance in Europe. U.S. military power is sharply reduced, and isolation becomes official policy once again. The surrender marks the end of the Allied cause. With America neutralized, no force remains capable of challenging the Axis powers. Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan divide the globe between them, establishing a new world order that will last for decades. The dream of liberation dies in silence. The division of the world. With America out of the fight, the Axis powers convene in Berlin to carve up the planet. The Nazi-Japanese meridian is drawn along the 70th meridian east, splitting Eurasia into two spheres of control. Germany dominates Europe, Africa, and the western half of Asia, while Japan rules over East Asia, Oceania, and the Pacific Islands. The conference is a spectacle of victory, with Hitler and Emperor Hirohito appearing side by side for the cameras. But beneath the smiles, both regimes view each other with deep suspicion. Each understands that the alliance was forged for war, not for peace, and that their interests will inevitably collide. In occupied territories, the new order comes swiftly. Colonial borders are erased, replaced by vast imperial provinces ruled directly from Berlin or Tokyo. Local cultures are suppressed, languages banned, and history rewritten to glorify the Axis. The concept of national sovereignty disappears entirely under the shadow of empire. The people of the world awaken to a chilling reality. There is no opposing superpower, no free nation to send aid or hope. The Axis map is now the world map, and the only resistance left is scattered, leaderless, and hunted. The age of democracy has ended without a final battle. The Nazi Empire's iron grip. Life under Nazi rule is defined by fear, obedience, and endless propaganda. From childhood, citizens are indoctrinated through schools, youth organizations, and public rallies. History textbooks erase Allied victories, painting the Reich as the savior of civilization. Every home is equipped with a government radio that broadcasts the Führer's voice daily. Dissent is unthinkable. The Gestapo's reach extends into every neighborhood, with informants rewarded for reporting even the smallest hint of rebellion. Neighbors spy on neighbors, and families are torn apart by betrayal. The fear of being denounced keeps the population silent and compliant. The Holocaust, far from ending in 1945, expands to a global scale. Millions more are targeted: Jews, Romani people, Slavs, political dissidents, the disabled, and anyone deemed racially unfit. Camps operate across the continents, hidden from the public eye but whispered about in terror. Economically, the Reich thrives on slave labor, extracting resources from conquered territories and funneling them into its military-industrial complex. A brutal hierarchy determines who enjoys prosperity. Aryan elites live in luxury while the rest of the world works and dies to maintain their power. Japan's Pacific Empire. While Germany controls the West, Japan cements its dominance over the Pacific and Asia. The Greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere becomes more than propaganda. It is a geopolitical reality enforced by the Imperial Army and Navy. Across the region, Japanese officials govern with ruthless efficiency. In cities like Manila, Singapore, and Jakarta, Japanese flags replace local symbols, and Shinto rituals are mandated in public schools. Indigenous cultures are systematically erased, replaced with Japanese language and traditions. Resistance is met with swift executions, often carried out in public as warnings. Japan's rule is fueled by the exploitation of resources: rubber from Malaya, oil from Indonesia, and manpower from every corner of the Pacific. Entire villages are conscripted into forced labor, building infrastructure meant only to serve Tokyo's war machine. The promise of prosperity is a hollow one. Despite its outward alliance with Germany, Japan begins to view the Reich as a future rival. Military planners in Tokyo quietly prepare for the day when the Pacific and the Atlantic will meet in conflict, and the true master of the world will be decided. The Cold War of Tyrants. By the early 1960s, the Axis alliance has transformed into a silent standoff. Germany and Japan no longer share intelligence, and both sides rush to develop nuclear weapons capable of annihilating the other. The seas between their empires become militarized zones patrolled by submarines and carriers. Berlin and Tokyo wage a covert war through espionage, sabotage, and proxy conflicts in Africa and South America. Puppet states loyal to one empire are targeted by the other in a constant struggle for influence. Entire governments collapse overnight under the weight of secret operations. Propaganda becomes a new battlefield. Germany broadcasts messages portraying Japan as a treacherous betrayer of Aryan ideals, while Japan paints the Reich as an arrogant colonial overlord unfit to lead Asia. Citizens in both empires are kept in a constant state of fear about the enemy beyond the border. The Cold War of Tyrants reshapes the political climate. Instead of a democratic-communist divide, the world lives under two authoritarian giants, each plotting the other's downfall. The dream of liberation remains buried, smothered beneath the ambitions of two empires. Shadows of resistance. Even in the darkest times, there are those who refuse to bow. Across the globe, scattered resistance cells form, connected by fragile networks of smugglers, codebreakers, and defectors. They operate in shadows, striking at supply lines, assassinating key officials, and spreading forbidden information. In the former United States, rebels call themselves the Free Sons of Liberty, smuggling weapons through abandoned subway tunnels and hiding in the Appalachian Mountains. In Europe, partisan fighters sabotage railways and disrupt propaganda broadcasts, risking immediate execution if caught. The Nazi and Japanese secret police work tirelessly to root out these dissidents. Entire villages are burned in retaliation for a single act of defiance. Families of rebels are imprisoned or executed to serve as an example to others. Fear is the greatest weapon of the Axis. Still, resistance endures, not because victory is certain, but because the alternative is silence. Every leaflet, every whisper, every smuggled radio signal is a spark in the darkness, keeping alive the fragile hope that one day the world might be free again. Science in chains. Under the Reich, scientific progress accelerates, but only in directions that serve the regime. German engineers perfect rocket technology, placing satellites in orbit by the early 1960s. These satellites are not for exploration, but for surveillance, watching every movement on the ground. Medical research thrives, though ethics are non-existent. Experiments on prisoners lead to horrific advances in biological and chemical weapons. Disease becomes a controlled tool of state power, with outbreaks accidentally wiping out rebellious populations. Japan mirrors these practices in its own empire. Unit 731's atrocities continue in secret, producing weapons designed to devastate entire cities. Civilian technology lags behind, as every innovation is repurposed for military dominance. The scientific community is a gilded cage. Brilliant minds are given endless resources but no freedom. Their work builds the foundations of a future defined not by wonder, but by absolute control. Propaganda and thought control. In the Nazi world, propaganda is not just political, it is a way of life. Every film, song, and book is approved by the Ministry of Culture. Heroes in popular stories are always loyal Aryan soldiers or dutiful citizens. Villains are caricatures of undesirable races and dissenters. Public rallies fill stadiums, where citizens chant in unison beneath towering swastikas. Attendance is mandatory and absences are noticed. The purpose is not only to spread ideology, but to create a sense of inescapable unity, a constant reminder that the state is everything. Japan's cultural control is just as suffocating. In its territories, films glorify the emperor as divine, and history lessons erase the concept of defeat. Even traditional local music is banned unless rewritten to praise the empire. Over time, generations grow up knowing no alternative. Memory fades, and for many, the world before the Axis is nothing but a rumor, a dangerous, forbidden myth. The Axis economy. By the 1970s, the global economy is entirely under Axis control. The Reich exploits Europe, Africa, and the Middle East for raw materials, while Japan dominates the Pacific's vast resources. Trade between the two powers is heavily restricted, each guarding its economic secrets. For ordinary people, work is mandatory. Quotas are set by the state, and failure to meet them brings punishment or reassignment to labor camps. Luxury goods are reserved for the elite, while the masses survive on rationed staples. Corporations are absorbed into the state apparatus, their leaders appointed by the regime. Innovation is allowed only if it benefits the military or strengthens the government's grip on power. Black markets thrive in the shadows, feeding both the resistance and the corrupt officials willing to look the other way. Economy becomes another weapon of control. Hunger, scarcity, and forced labor keep the people dependent, ensuring that survival is only possible through loyalty to the state. The 21st century Reich. By the year 2000, Berlin stands as the capital of the Western world, a sprawling metropolis of steel and stone, adorned with monuments to Nazi victories. The streets are patrolled by autonomous drones, and cameras line every building. Privacy no longer exists. In Tokyo, the Eastern Empire mirrors this image of authoritarian modernity. Neon propaganda screens tower over crowded streets, broadcasting the emperor's decrees around the clock. Citizens are monitored not only by the police, but by one another, incentivized to report any sign of disloyalty. The Axis powers have colonized space, establishing orbital weapons platforms and lunar bases. Yet these achievements do not serve humanity. They exist to cement dominance, ensuring no rebellion can grow beyond the planet's grasp. The new millennium is not an age of progress, but of perfected oppression. The world's future is calculated, engineered, and enforced with cold precision. The Great Rebellion. In 2015, decades of quiet resistance erupt into a global uprising. Coordinated attacks on infrastructure cripple the Reich's surveillance networks. In the Pacific, Japanese warships are sunk by sabotage from within their own fleets. Underground leaders unite under a single banner, sharing intelligence across continents. Former enemies become allies in the fight for liberation. Cities long thought loyal to the regime suddenly rise up, overwhelming garrisons with sheer numbers. The Axis responds with brutal force, deploying chemical weapons and mass executions. Entire regions are scorched to prevent them from falling into rebel hands. The death toll is staggering, but the rebellion refuses to die. For the first time in 70 years, the Axis powers face a war they cannot control. The world teeters between freedom and annihilation. The fall of the Axis. By 2022, the tide turns. The rebellion captures key nuclear facilities, forcing both Berlin and Tokyo into a defensive stance. Defections within the military accelerate as soldiers realize the regime's collapse is inevitable. In Berlin, The Reichstag is stormed by rebels and the swastika is torn down for the first time in nearly a century. Hitler's successors are executed or captured, their trials broadcast to the liberated territories. Tokyo falls months later after a massive uprising in China cuts off Japan's supply lines. The emperor is overthrown, and the co-prosperity sphere collapses in chaos. The war is over, but the scars of the Axis era remain. The world stands at the edge of an uncertain future, free but deeply fractured. The price of freedom. The year is 2025. Nations once erased from the map are reborn, but rebuilding is slow. Generations raised in tyranny struggle to adapt to democracy. The truth about the past, long hidden, is finally revealed, bringing both relief and deep sorrow. Memorials rise in former Axis capitals, honoring the billions who perished under the regimes. Museums preserve evidence of the atrocities, a warning to future generations about the cost of complacency. The world unites to form a new international order, one dedicated to preventing another empire from rising unchecked. Yet whispers of extremist movements remain, reminding everyone that history's darkest chapters can return if forgotten. The people of Earth walk forward into an uncertain dawn, carrying both the hope of freedom and the heavy knowledge of what it took to earn it. This alternate history is not our world, but it could have been. Every choice, every battle, every sacrifice made in our true timeline prevented this nightmare from becoming reality. The courage of those who stood against tyranny shaped the freedom we know today. In imagining this darker path, we are reminded of the fragile nature of liberty. It is not a gift, it is a responsibility carried by each generation. Without vigilance, history can be rewritten and freedom can be lost. If you have stayed with this story until the end, you know how close the world once came to falling into darkness. Share this knowledge, remember the sacrifices, and guard the truth fiercely. History belongs to all of us, but only if we protect it.